Hey there. Welcome back to the show. So today I'm going to do the show a little differently than usual. I'm going to go into a three-part teaching series about values. So this is part one of three parts. It'll be a three-part episode. And values is something that I've spent good 10 to 15 years going pretty deep into about how values can help, for one, shape us, which is sort of an obvious conversation on some level, that values will shape who we are, our personal values, and the values we're relating to in ourselves. But outside of the obvious, I've really taken a deep inquiry into how can we get to know our own value system more directly, and how that translates into really being able to shape our future and having influence over our lives. And from a kind of life design conversation, there's this notion, this concept of life design, that we can have a large influence over our lives and meet a lot of the desires we want to meet in one lifetime and achieve what we're trying to achieve and strive towards something that is outside of ourselves. The role that values plays in that, and how knowing our values and how that can motivate us, and how we can actually sort of hack our own behavioral systems so that we're really living in accordance with who we see ourselves to be, and creating a life that feels like we're part of a life that makes sense to us about who we are, right? So mostly I'm going to focus this conversation on the area of career. And that is not the only area in life that we would ever talk about when we talk about life design and living the life you want. There's a lot of areas of life. And, for many people, career doesn't play out in a traditional sense. And so I'm going to focus on these conversations around career. But there are a lot of other areas of life that this conversation should go into when we talk about values, defining your destiny. It could be about how you are a part of a family and running a family household and raising children, which could be a career in and of itself, which I'll talk about. It could be about how you there's certain activities that you love doing. It could be about values of different types of service. So, there's a lot of areas of life I could speak to there. But with that said, I think career is very important. Now, the reason I'm going to really hit on career is because many people find themselves working in their lifetime. The average human being, this is very interesting. The average human being works close to 90,000 hours in their lifetime. Now, that's a lot of time, right? The only thing that the average human being is doing more hours in a lifetime than work is sleeping. And that's if you sleep well. And if you're listening to this podcast, you may not sleep well. Because we're a mental health podcast, and a lot of people who struggle with mental health don't sleep well. So maybe work hours trump your sleep, if that's you. And for sure, that's been me. And the other piece why I want to focus on career is because when we think about 90,000 hours in your lifetime at work, there's another little piece to this that's very interesting, which is if we just kind of play with the notion for a moment of the Malcolm Gladwell in his book, that it takes 10,000 hours to master something. In your work life, you can master 8 to 10 things in a lifetime with that many hours if you're putting in 90,000 hours. Now, there's a lot of other pieces I'm going to talk about with career. There's limitations in terms of how we can work and jobs that we can actually get, depending on where you are, and if there's other aspects of marginalized populations to speak to. And I'm going to talk to these things. So I think a good way for me to really dive in here with you about values and career, and then knowing how to get to knowing who you are and the process of releasing what you aren't, which is what the real topic of today is. How do you release the values that are not yours so you really know you're moving in your career on values that are your own, that you've really digested and you've made them your own? So I want to start with a story of myself. Some of you who are listening to this episode have heard this story in different forms. I've told this story many times. This is a time in my life I was graduating college. So often young people, let's say age 18 to 25, and definitely older for some, but it's definitely a big time of what do I want to do in this world? That question is moving through a lot of young adults. What do I want to do? What do I think I want my career entry point to be about? Of course, that was something going on for me in a big way when I was in college. Now, my story is a little more radical and a little more disturbing than some, but it can be disturbing for people. And many college students are struggling in this choice. And many adults, which I'll get to soon, are struggling in this too, later in their life. So this story starts with a train ride to the World Trade Center. Now, the World Trade Center, this was in 1997. So the World Trade Center, this was before 2001, before 9/11. Twin Towers were there. And I am first on a bus and getting on a train. And on this bus ride, I am going to Bear Stearns. Bear Stearns was the third largest brokerage firm in the world at that time. They went down in 2008 in the housing bubble crisis. They didn't make it through that very well. So maybe I was foreseeing that and I didn't want to be a part of that. I don't know. But what happened to me was I was on the way. I had graduated college. It was the summer that I graduated college. And they wanted me to spearhead their Y2K project. Now, let me tell you what that is. So if you remember Y2K, the big fear was that when the code, the digits of 1999, the last two digits rolled over to 2000, that the way coding was, the way that software was written, that when we go to 99 to 00, the computers are going to interpret that essentially, that software is going to interpret that as going backwards in time, and it's going to cause a major glitch. Now, the brokerage firms in New York on Wall Street were very concerned about this. So they found me through an internship process that I was in the summer before, where I found all this money for them that they had lost, Bear Stearns, and I kind of rose through that, and they were like, "This is our Y2K expert, and we trust this person, and this person's actually going to be on a task force of 10. It'll be 10 people from the 10 largest firms in the world. These 10 people are going to solve this problem for us." And so they wanted me to do that. They wanted for me to sign a contract with them for 3 years, work on Wall Street, and solve this problem. So I'm on this bus ride, and then it becomes a train ride. But I'm on this ride, and I'm going in, and I'm looking at six figures in 1997 as a salary. And for me, coming out of college, like that number now is like, it would just the equivalent math just to kind of take this in. So my salary now that they were going to offer me would probably be like 250, 350 with all the other benefits that were in there. So it's a big salary, right, for a young person coming straight out of school. So I'm going in this bus ride. I have this contract, right, in my hands. And what's going on for me is I'm in a deep, deep inner conflict of, am I signing my life away? Like, to me, I was like, am I signing the deal with the devil? Now, I was not in something of like Wall Street's the devil and all that. Like, that's fine if somebody's in that, but that's not what I was in. I was in a inner conflict of like, is that really me? Like, am I going to be like a Wall Street person? Is that who I'm meant to be right now with my life? Is that how I'm meant to serve? Like, I'm obviously good at the aspect that this job required. I knew that. But I was like, is that what's important to me? So I was on this bus ride asking this value question, but I assumed I was doing this. I was just asking the question. I was in a deep conflict. I was anxious, but I was totally assuming that I'm taking this ride, okay, to go sign this contract and work there for 3 years and be in the World Trade Center and, be on Wall Street doing that thing. So this is my moment that I didn't have this knowledge back then of that I'm actually dealing with, like, who am I? What are my values? And what are not my values? Now, I didn't know, obviously, at this time, I was young. I didn't have these frameworks. I didn't know what was going on. I just knew I was anxious. I was scared. I didn't quite know. I had some thoughts, right? Some value-based thoughts flowing through my head on this ride. Like, is this me? But mostly my thoughts were like, this seems like a great opportunity. I might as well just do this for a few years and get through that. And I was like, I could do anything for a few years was kind of like the message I was telling myself. So let me digress here for a moment. So I'm going to pause from that story. I'm going to come back to the story. The story gets interesting. Right? I'm leaving us off here. I'm not even in New York yet. I'm coming from New Jersey, actually, on this ride, getting to New York. And I'm kind of like tripping out, freaking out, but I think I'm taking this job. So let me pull back here. I want to talk about values 3, why I walk through this story with you. So when we look at career, and this is a career-oriented story, right, about values. When we look at the state of affairs globally, we're not doing well on this planet in terms of people feeling good about their work and people feeling engaged. We're actually doing pretty poorly as a global culture and also within countries. And what you'll hear here in a minute is that actually the United States is actually doing better than most, which is interesting. It's not what I would assume, but it's true. So globally, and you can look this up. You can go to the Gallup State of the Global Workplace. They do this regularly. When you look at what they're surveying, basically what we find here is that about 20%, 21% of employees. Now, this is looking at employees. So this is about the career track of an employee. It's not about entrepreneurs starting your own business. But there's a lot more employees on the planet, right? So when we look at employees, what we find is about 20, 21% of employees are not really engaged at work, meaning they are disinterested. They don't really know why they're there. They are trying to hang on to get their job done. And when you look at the amount of people on social media right now who are employees, it's high unless you're in a position as an employee where you can't be. There are direct labor jobs and things where you just can't be. But anyways, this is an important statistic. Now, here's where it gets even more important. Globally, when you look at who's thriving, okay, so this kind of takes it to the next level. It's not just about who's engaged, who's not engaged. So 21% are not that engaged. Okay. Sorry. 21% are engaged. I think I flipped that on you. 80% are not engaged. If I just flip that, let's just take a second there. So 80% are not engaged at work. 20% are engaged at work. When we look at thriving, not just engaged, but we look at who's thriving and really finds meaning in their work, we're talking about 9% globally. Okay. So that's kind of a striking statistic to be aware of, which is we're talking about 10% of the planet that actually feel like they are psyched about their work. 10%. Now, when we look at the United States, it gets slightly better. 70% are not engaged versus 80% are not engaged globally. But half of employees in the United States are actually pretty stressed about their job and feel chronic stress about work. So, and these statistics, if you dig a little deeper, more people than not feel stuck in the world professionally. They feel stuck in their job in some way. So the global state of affairs is not great when we think about people being satisfied and fulfilled and meaning about their work as employees. It's low. It's not good. So why am I telling you these stats? Because these stats are indicative, in my opinion, of a values problem. We don't get educated about understanding values and personal values and how to differentiate personal values and then how to act on personal values and make sure you live a values-based life and a values-based career. That's not a part of education growing up. So most people fall into careers that they think they're interested in, only later to find that they're not. So I'm going to come back now to my story. I'm on this bus ride and I'm going into the subway station now at the World Trade Center. And for me, the World Trade Center, the Twin Towers, they represented something for everyone, right? And it, whatever that is, okay? And it was different for everybody. These tallest buildings in New York City, and there was a feeling about these buildings for me, and so I'm going underneath these buildings into the subway stations, and my panic is rising right now. Okay. Remember, I'm heading over to Bear Stearns to one of their offices to sign this contract, 3 years. And there's a lot of money involved. And I've got this panic rising and I've got thoughts of, is this me? Is it not? And that kind of stuff. Not a lot more context than that other than a lot of anxiety. And so I get into the subway station and then all of a sudden, this was like a psychedelic journey for me, but I wasn't on psychedelics. I didn't really use psychedelics that often at that time at all. And everything starts getting strange in terms of the way I'm seeing things and hearing things. I'm sort of having auditory like manipulation where sounds are getting drawn out. And my vision's getting slightly blurry and my heart rate's going up. So my heart's really beating faster and faster and faster. And I'm sitting there in a subway station and I'm like, what's going on? And before this moment, it was anxiety. And, when this kind of rush happens where you're sort of increased level of fear, heart's beating, I'm in cold sweats. Then I start going into like, oh my God, like I think I'm having a heart attack. Something's happening here that's not okay, right? So I'm not, in this moment, I'm just like, I think I'm having a heart attack. I'm about to pass out. I feel horrible. I'm scared. I'm like, now I'm starting to like go in and out of even being able to tell what's going on around me. So I'm like dissociating and really in a deep panic. And then all of a sudden, it was very interesting that it happened to me this way. It was like a lightning bolt of insight came into my system. And it was this eruption of panic that kind of exploded in me. And so I fall down on the floor and I'm like heaving, trying to catch my breath. Basically a panic attack, right, is the best way to describe this. But what starts coming through me are all the thoughts of the values that weren't mine. And they just start pouring through me. Okay. All these thoughts of like, be a doctor or be a lawyer or be a banker. They're just all these like random thoughts coming through me. And I just like, I'm watching them in total panic and freaking out on the floor. I'm in a suit. And I'm not even like a suit person. So I'm wearing this suit. It didn't resonate with me. And I'm in this thing and I'm crying. People are walking by me. No one's helping me. I mean, it's New York. That doesn't often happen where someone would stop. But so I'm on the floor, like freaking out. I'm on the subway station floor. It's like dirty and I'm a mess. And these thoughts are moving through me. It was like, buy a house, buy a car, get married early. It doesn't matter what you do. Just take the opportunity. You must like strive when you're young because all these responsibilities are going to come later. Thought after thought. Don't just discover yourself. There's nothing to discover there. You take a good paycheck when you can. So all these thoughts are just burning through me and I'm watching them. And I'm in just total panic, but somehow I'm tracking these thoughts. And the insight starts coming that I'm talking about as these thoughts are just piling out of me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like I've picked this up. All these values, all these ideas about who I'm supposed to be. I picked these up wherever. Like I didn't know in the moment where I was getting these thoughts from. So I'm like in this process of recognizing that these are not my thoughts. They're my thoughts, but these are not my values. And it starts to really sink in like this career path isn't mine. It's not mine. It's someone else's. And there's nothing wrong with it. I wasn't having a thing about there's something wrong with the career path. It was just like, this isn't me. And I'm just like releasing about all these messages that I had inside of me that I thought were mine. Like I actually didn't even know I had these messages in me. I didn't have a lot of distinction from them at that point. Like I thought, again, like I was like, it could be really, a great thing for me to be on Wall Street and do that. Like that sounds exciting to me. And I thought that I actually had a value there, but as it was really, and there's probably some value there for me, but as it was really coming out and releasing through me, I was like, oh, this is not me. This is someone else. This might be my parents. This might be the community I grew up in. This might be messages I was hearing on TV in some way and taking them in. Or the culture I grew up in on the East Coast. There's a lot of places that over time I understood where these came from. And so in this process of me catharting, and I should say that, making a choice to not take a job on some level might not sound like a big deal, right? Like you might be like, oh, this okay, but it's not that big of a deal if you don't take a certain job. Like it's something. For me, it was like the most biggest existential crisis in my life of like, am I really gonna not take this position? And at that point, I had like $50 in a bank account. Like I had no money. I didn't have a place to go live. I had no idea what I was going to do. So for me, it was a big crisis because I was like, can I actually get by? Can I figure this out? Knowing that I have no idea where this is going if I don't do this. I have no idea all this time in college, these 4 years, right? I was like, okay, I had all this time to discover myself and all this time to look into something and study something and this and that. Like, can I really like go into the world and start that over again, but with no structure around me, no school? And I'm just going to like find some job, pay me some money, and get by and not know what I'm supposed to do with my life. And for me, it was a big, big moment and crisis and very scary. And I think for many young people, this is extremely scary. But as we see in these stats that I told you earlier, this this problem of being in jobs and careers that don't align with us is actually a real problem. A lot of people feel this in the world. And often we can get by in the world and not have to think about it, or maybe we don't get to think about it and we just have to go to work and pay our bills, but we still feel it, right? So even if we don't get to consider making a change because it's like there's just no way that anyone, certain people in certain places just can't see what else is out there, we still have to feel it. So I got up from the subway floor. And the first thing I did was tear up the contract. I was like, I ripped it right there. I'm having this whole like experience, hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people over the course of probably, 30 minutes where I'm having this experience of passing by me. And I'm in like some big dramatic musical play out there where I'm like, I'm like crying and I'm cathartic and I'm having this whole process. And then I'm like tearing some big dramatic moment where I'm like tearing up a contract for myself. Like nobody, like people are watching this, but it's like I'm having this big dramatic moment, right? But like it was a dramatic moment for me of being like, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to live a life that isn't based in my values. So I was able to compose myself and get up, throw that contract out in the garbage. And I'm going to pause the story there because there's more sections of the story to tell about what happens next. But I want to introduce something for people here, which is that, if you or somebody that can relate to feeling like there's something off. Again, I'm talking about career, but it can apply to other things where you're like, I don't feel congruent in some way with what's happening right now. Maybe I'm close to feeling congruent with my career or my job, and maybe I'm far away from it. Or maybe it's like really far away. So there's a releasing exercise. It's not that complex, but I use this with a lot of people over the years when I was working with clients to try and like speed up the process that happened for me. Because a lot of this often happens very, very slow for people over time, right? It's like, oh, there's like a little value you separate from, but like you still feel off. Your system's like knowing I'm not fully aligned. And I have to say, like a life where you feel aligned in your values, and particularly in career, versus a life where you don't, it's not confusing. It's like, oh my God, I can't wait to get up in the morning to go to work. And sure, we have some hard days, but everybody's got a hard day, right? But when we are aligned and congruent with our values in our career, it's a very exciting life overall. I mean, that alone is exciting. There's so much passion and you feel so much self-worth. And I'm going to get into that and about why you feel so much self-worth. So this releasing exercise that I've been working with over the years is kind of simple, but I've seen it really help a lot of people. And I think it's a great exercise for anyone to do, to see if there's anything left in the values category that aren't your own, that you haven't looked at. And it's kind of simple. You go to a spreadsheet or if you're still going journal, old school notebook, and you like to write a lot, that's fine too. So in your spreadsheet, you write out at a minimum 100 messages. Maybe you've released some of these already. It doesn't matter. Of how you should be, how you should behave, what you're supposed to do with your life, what you're supposed to do with your career, who you're supposed to be with, the shoulds. And you just write them out one after the other. Now, some of these may be your own values that you've integrated and they do feel like yours. Don't worry about that. You just write them out. 100 minimum. This could be 300 sentences, right? In my case, like, I'm supposed to have a career that, is highly ambitious, that many people look at as successful in this culture. And then one of the messages I was purging was like, and that's a doctor, a lawyer, a banker, or something of this order, right? So like message after message could be about who you're supposed to marry, and it could be about what you're supposed to do with your time, what you're not supposed to do with your time. These can be hundreds of messages. I've done this for myself. And, I think that it's fair to say we have hundreds of messages that are just boggling around in there. And maybe they don't have much weight on us anymore, but maybe they do, that really don't represent who we are, right? And then what I ask people to do with that is to cross out the messages. After you've written them all out, you go back and you look at it and you go, does this represent me? Is this who I am? Line item number 1. No. You cross it out. And you cross it out and you cross it out and you cross it out and you cross out message 10 and 20 and 30, 100 messages, 200 messages. You just cross them out and you cross them out. And you really stay connected to your body in this process. And you really allow yourself to attempt to release your hold on these messages. Or I should say, to help release the hold these messages have on you, so that we can release these values-driven messaging about who we're not. And this is a step toward who we are. So this is what happened to me in that subway station, in that train ride, and the bus ride. Like, this was the thing that happened to me, where I was intrinsically going through this metamorphosis around what's not me. And I was trying really hard to fit in a box that wasn't me. And it wasn't me. And some part of me, which I will get into in another part of this coming up, was screaming, you could say from the heavens, if you like that language, about like, hey, like, you can do this and you'll be good at this. And you'll be very successful at this, and you'll make a lot of money at this, and you'll have a very pretty external life. It's going to all look good. But it was screaming down at me, but you'll always know it's not who you are. And it's not even close in this case. There's something else here for you. So that message is inside of all of us, and there's fine tuning. It's not always that drastic of like, oh, this isn't you, this career's not you and this job's not you. And, when you're 21, it's easier to be like, hey, I'm going on a train to nowhere. Versus like when you're 50 and let's say you have a family and you have kids, right? Like you probably think about this, like you're not going to just go on a train to nowhere in that case. Like there's a stage and a responsibility and a sort of process, a strategic process to deal with that issue if you're greatly incongruent with your life, that's okay. Like, you take your time. But it's always good to fine tune this instrument around releasing what you're not, so that you can really clear that out consistently, because these messages will bubble up over time. Ones that you didn't have to relate to, different values you didn't have to relate to because of different stages of your life, right? Let's say you're becoming a parent, like now you've got a whole new set of messages in there that you never even thought about until you were a parent. So these messages will bubble over time. It's good to do this exercise from time to time, release who you're not. Now I'm going to end here and I'm going to kind of close here. And then in the next part of this, we're going to go into knowing who you are. So that's going to be part 2. Knowing who you are. And I'm going to tell a little bit more about my story on my getting on a new train to nowhere, which is what happened to me. And I'm going to get into more values theory in part 2. So we can start to kind of wrap our heads around here together. Well, how do you understand values, and how could we even end up in values that are not our own? And then what happens to our behaviors when we're in values that are our own and we're acting on them? And what happens to when we're not acting on values that are our own? Our behaviors change. And so we're going to look at that. And that's all really looking at a lot of more impulsive, pleasure-seeking behaviors for when we're not really acting on things that are really in our own values, and versus like very strategic long-term fulfillment behaviors when we're actually moving toward a vision for our future of what we want it to look like. So that's part 2. So come back for part 2. Thanks for listening.